I dialed Maya's number with the same nervousness I once felt before a job interview. My only daughter. My only child, surely. She would pick up and fill the silence of the last few weeks with good news. When she answered, I asked, gently, when her wedding would be. There was a pause, then her voice, sharp and smug. We got married yesterday, just for special people. I froze with the phone pressed to my ear. 3 years of covering rent, stocking their refrigerator, paying for furniture, even wiring money for so-called emergencies, all in the name of love. I had convinced myself sacrifice was the price of staying close to my daughter. Now those words. Special people felt like shards of glass in my chest. I stared across the living room at the pale lavender dress I had bought months earlier, hanging on the closet door. I had imagined myself in it, standing beside my daughter, smiling for photos that would last a lifetime. Instead, it looked like a costume from a play where I'd never been cast. Memories pushed in. Uninvited Maya as a child, running into my arms after a thunderstorm, whispering, "You're my favorite person, Mom." How easily those memories turned sour, like milk left in the sun. The phone rang again. It was Helena, my sister in Ohio. "So, how was the big day?" she asked brightly. I couldn't bring myself to explain. My voice shook as I mumbled something about a small gathering. Just them. The lie tasted bitter. But I couldn't yet face the shame of the truth. That night, I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Grief knotted with humiliation until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Over and over, I heard the words special people. Each repetition carved deeper into my heart, leaving me hollow and restless. By morning, the lavender dress still hung untouched, but I knew it marked the start of something I could no longer ignore. The lavender dress lay across my bed like an accusation. Beside it, the unopened shoebox still held the silver heels I'd chosen carefully, imagining how they would catch the light on Maya's wedding day. On the nightstand sat a crisp envelope with 10 $100 bills, saved to give them as a blessing for their new life together. All of it untouched, all of it useless. Out of habit, more than curiosity, I opened my phone and scrolled through social media. There it was, the wedding I had been written out of. Maya stood in a lace gown, radiant, holding Gideon's arm. His parents flanked them. Champagne glasses raised high. Her siblings-in-law beamed as though they had claimed a prize. I studied every detail with the slow ache of someone pressing on a bruise. The gown, yes. That was the one she had claimed she needed bill money for. I had wired her $800, thinking I was easing her burden. Instead, I had bought myself out of a seat at my own daughter's wedding. There was no sign of hesitation on her face, no shadow of regret that I wasn't there. Just joy, and the pride of strangers who now carried the title of family. My chest tightened as I whispered, I was never meant to be part of this picture. The words dragged up another memory Maya promising years ago, during one of our late-night talks when I get married. "You'll be my first call, Mom." I had held on to that as if it were scripture. Now, the betrayal of that broken promise cut far deeper than the wasted fabric and paper on my bed. I closed the phone, placed the envelope back in the drawer, and pushed the dress into the closet. It disappeared behind the door, but the humiliation did not. Something sharp and unfamiliar stirred beneath my ribs, scraping against years of self-blame. It wasn't just sorrow anymore. It was anger, rising slow but steady, waiting to be heard. By the next week, that anger would meet its first test. A week passed, and though the lavender dress was hidden behind the closet door, the humiliation of it still pressed on me. I had barely touched food, moving through the days as if I were a shadow in my own house. Then the phone rang. It was Maya. Her voice, so sharp and dismissive when she'd told me I wasn't special, now quivered. "Mom, the rent is overdue. The landlord's threatening us." "You forgot to make the transfer." For a moment, I almost rose automatically. As I had 100 times before, I saw myself rushing to the bank in the rain, canceling my own doctor's appointment, eating beans and rice for weeks just so she and Gideon could eat steak. The habit of sacrifice was etched into my bones. But something inside me had shifted since that lavender dress stayed folded in the dark. I sat back down, pressing the phone to my ear, and breathed slowly. "Maya," I said, calm and deliberate. "Didn't I tell you I only help special people?" The silence that followed was heavy. I could almost hear her breath catching, almost see her face twisting in disbelief. "Mom," she stammered, "don't be cruel. Cruel." The word stung, but not enough to undo me. My hand shook, but not from fear, only from the force of holding my ground. "I have to go," I said, and ended the call before she could weave more excuses. I set the phone on the table and sat still. The house filled with the kind of quiet I hadn't heard in years. My chest felt hollow, yet light. I walked into the kitchen and brewed coffee. The smell rose warmly around me. For decades, every cup I poured had been followed by a thought of someone else's needs. That morning, I lifted the mug and sipped slowly, savoring it without guilt. It was only coffee, bitter and hot. Yet it tasted like a beginning. I spread the receipts across the dining table, a battlefield of numbers staring back at me. Bank statements, scribbled notes, old transfer slips, each one proof of my eagerness to keep Maya and Gideon afloat. I picked up my calculator, fingers trembling but determined. $500 a month for rent. 36 months straight. 18,000. Groceries. Utilities. Little emergencies that became habits, 12,000. Loans they never paid back, 3,400. Altogether, $33,400? I leaned back, the numbers blurring for a moment, turning toward the framed photograph of Robert on the sideboard. I whispered, "I spent your legacy buying respect that never existed." My stomach knotted, shame burning my cheeks, but beneath it came something sharper, cleaner clarity. The next morning, I walked into the bank, my purse heavy with every choice I had made. Mr. Kane, the manager who had processed my transfers for years, looked up with surprise. "Cancel them," I said firmly. "Every automatic payment to Maya and Gideon." He blinked, then leaned forward. "Mrs. Albright, are you sure you've never missed one in 3 years?" "Yes," I answered, my voice steadier than I felt. "I've been blind long enough." As I signed the papers, a weight lifted. Outside, the air felt cooler, almost sweet. My shoulders straightened, the street brighter than it had seemed in months. For the first time in years, my money was mine, back home. The silence was louder than ever. My phone, usually buzzing with demands dressed as conversations, stayed mute. Not a single "I love you," "Mom," not even a hollow "How are you?" Just nothing. Silence where affection should have been. Across the street, Eleanor Brooks raised her hand in a friendly wave. She must have seen the drawn look on my face, because she called. "Everything all right?" Her voice was kind, warmer than anything I'd heard from my daughter in weeks. I forced a smile, nodded, and felt tears rise anyway. Something in me knew that this was only the beginning. When I turned the corner to my street, something felt off. 3 cars I didn't recognize sat in front of my house. My pulse quickened as I stepped inside. The air froze in my lungs. Maya and Gideon were already there, and a man in a gray suit stood between them. My dining table was covered with my documents. scattered as if I were already gone. I stared at the spare keys dangling from Gideon's hand, the ones I had given them years ago, just in case. "Mom," Maya began, her voice sticky sweet. "We're just worried about you. This is Mr. Fallon, an attorney. He'll help you sign a few papers so we can manage your finances for a little while. Only temporary." My heart pounded like a drum, my hands damp at my sides. Mr. Fallon slid a folder toward me, his expression polished and professional. Gideon folded his arms, smirking, as if the outcome was already sealed. I looked at the papers, at the signatures waiting to be filled. For a moment, fear threatened to crush me. Then, in one swift motion, I picked up the folder and walked it to the trash can. I let it drop inside with a snap. "No transition is happening here," I said, my voice sharp, louder than I expected. "Except yours to the front door." Maya's face twisted, her voice rising with practiced innocence. "Mom, don't be like this. We're trying to help you," Gideon sneered, muttering under his breath. The lawyer adjusted his tie. "Mrs. Albright, these are simple safeguards. For your peace of mind." I stood firm, though my knees shook. "My peace of mind will return the moment you leave." I pointed to the door. For a long, tense beat, none of them moved. Then, muttering threats, they finally filed out. I bolted the lock, my breath ragged, my body trembling from the storm inside me, leaning against the door. I knew with piercing clarity their love was never free. It had always been collateral for control. And if they couldn't steal my consent, they would soon try to steal something far worse. 3 days passed before the next blow landed. I was in the kitchen, rinsing coffee cups, when the doorbell rang. A woman stood there, neat blazer, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Albright, I'm a social investigator with the Department of Senior Services. We've received concerns about your mental state. May I come in?" The words cut me cold. My lips parted, but no sound came. Concerns, mental state. I didn't need anyone to tell me where those words had originated. Maya. She had escalated. I let the woman inside, my voice flat as I asked her to wait. My hands shook as I dialed Mr. Weber, the lawyer whose card I had saved after a friend's recommendation. He arrived within the hour, his presence steadying me. "Mrs. Albright," he said gently. "Show her what you showed me." Together, we laid out my bank records, every check signed, every bill paid, each entry neatly aligned. My house was clean, refrigerator stocked, appointments scheduled in my own handwriting. I answered the investigator's questions clearly, explaining routines I had kept for decades. She took notes, flipping through my files with a furrowed brow. "At last." She set her pen down. "I see no cause for intervention," she said. "Case closed." When the door shut behind her, I sagged into a chair, trembling so hard I had to clutch the edge of the table. "They want me declared incompetent," I whispered, voice barely audible. Weber met my eyes, his expression grave. "This is financial elder abuse. Renata, they're not stopping at manipulation. They're trying to take everything." That night, I drifted into uneasy sleep. In my dreams, Maya was a child again, chasing bubbles across the yard, her laughter ringing clear in the summer air. But when I reached for her, the child dissolved, and in her place stood the woman with cold eyes, signatures in her hands. I woke with tears on my cheeks. Love had twisted into litigation, into schemes meant to erase me while I was still alive, and I knew the fight was only beginning. The letter arrived on a gray morning, heavy with the weight of betrayal. It was a formal notice from the county court. Maya and Gideon had filed a petition for guardianship over me. My own daughter was asking a judge to declare me incapable of handling my life. I read the lines twice, then 3 times. my hands trembling. Their petition listed witnesses a neighbor who had never liked me, always scowling about my visitors. And, to my shock, the pharmacist I had trusted for years. Later, I would learn Lena had convinced him to sign a statement under false pretenses. I called Weber immediately. He listened without interrupting, then said, "We'll meet this head on. I want you to undergo an independent mental evaluation, not because you need to, but because we will take away their ammunition." 2 days later, I sat in Dr. Moore's office. She was brisk but kind, running me through memory tests, puzzles, financial scenarios. Hours passed, and with each question I felt my confidence grow. When she set down her clipboard, she smiled. "Mrs. Albright, you're sharper than most 50-year-olds I see. There is no doubt about your capacity." Her words were a balm, but fear still gnawed at me. Judges were human. What if they believed the tears Maya could summon at will? What if lies outshouted truth? I imagined my accounts frozen, my home no longer mine, my dignity stripped by a ruling that favored performance over reality. That afternoon, Eleanor knocked on my door carrying a plate of cookies. She listened quietly as I poured out everything: the notice, the witnesses, the evaluation. Then she took my hand in hers. "Renata, you're not alone. We'll testify. We've seen your strength, your clarity. We won't let them erase you." I squeezed her hand, tears welling. True family, I realized, sometimes lived across the street, not in the cradle you once rocked. The date for the hearing loomed closer, and I braced myself for the stage where lies and truth would finally collide. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and nerves. I sat beside Mr. Weber, my palms damp, my heart beating too loudly in my chest. When the bailiff called the case, Maya and Gideon swept in as though attending a funeral. Maya in black, Gideon solemn and stiff. Maya was called first. She clutched a tissue and lowered her eyes as though grief itself had carved her face. "My mother's decline devastates us," she said, voice breaking in all the right places. "She isolates, spends irrationally, refuses help. We only want to protect her." Tears welled, shining like jewels under the courtroom lights. Weber rose for cross-examination. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "When was the last time you called your mother without asking her for money?" Maya froze. The silence stretched until even the judge looked up. Weber continued. "Is it true you told her only special people were invited to your wedding?" Color rushed into her cheeks. Those words were taken out of context. She muttered. Gideon took the stand next, painting me as paranoid, unstable. I watched his smirk as he described my decision to install locks and cameras as though I were a lunatic building a bunker. But when the pharmacist testified, he admitted under Weber's steady questioning that he had signed a paper Lena presented without understanding its purpose. The neighbor, grumbling about traffic and noise, revealed his resentment more than any actual concern for my well-being. Then it was my turn. I walked to the stand, legs trembling but back straight. I spoke slowly, clearly, of 3 years of sacrifice, $33,400 siphoned from my savings, the exclusion from the wedding I had dreamed of attending, the day I returned home to find a lawyer rifling through my papers. I regret only that it took me so long to say no, I said, my voice breaking, but never collapsing. The gallery murmured. Shifting with unease, Judge Miller leaned forward, hands clasped, listening with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. I returned to my seat, every breath a weight, waiting to learn whose version of love would matter most. The hours of waiting felt longer than years. Every shuffle of papers, every cough in the courtroom made my nerves twitch. When Judge Miller finally returned, The air grew so still I could hear my own heartbeat. He cleared his throat, his gaze steady. After reviewing the evidence, this court finds that Mrs. Renata Albright is fully competent. What I see here is not incapacity, but a clear attempt at financial exploitation. The petition for guardianship is denied. The words crashed over me like sunlight breaking through a storm. Relief flooded my chest. So strong I nearly sobbed. Across the aisle, Maya's face twisted with naked hatred. Gideon muttered a string of curses under his breath, and their lawyer lowered his eyes, shrinking in defeat. As they passed me on their way out, Maya leaned close, her whisper venomous. "You'll regret this, you'll die alone." I inhaled deeply, steadying myself. Better alone with dignity. I murmured, then surrounded by thieves. Mr. Weber touched my arm, guiding me out. "On the courthouse steps," he said quietly. "Renata, it's time to think about your legacy. Update your will. Make sure no one can ever twist your trust again." That afternoon, I sat at my desk drafting new papers. No lump sums. No open doors for manipulation. Instead, a trust earmarked for charities that protect the elderly, and conditional clauses so airtight even the greediest hands would find nothing to grab. For the first time in years, I felt the pen in my hand as a weapon not of anger, but of control. When evening came, Eleanor and a few neighbors arrived with casseroles and wine. They lifted their glasses, smiling warmly. "To freedom," Eleanor said. "To courage." I raised my glass, tears slipping silently down my cheeks. And for the first time in a long while, I smiled without fear of what tomorrow might bring. Months passed, and I no longer measured time in court dates or transfers, but in mornings of light spilling through my new windows. I had sold the house that held too many memories of intrusion and moved into a sunlit apartment downtown. The air smelled different here: coffee shops, bakeries, laughter from the street below. I found purpose again by joining a volunteer group that taught seniors how to guard against financial abuse, sitting at tables with women and men who looked at me with recognition. I told my story plainly. It became a warning, but also an ember of hope. Some nodded with tears, others with clenched jaws, but all left knowing silence was not their only option. For the first time in decades, I traveled. In Florence, I stood before the Duomo with sketchbook in hand, lines of stone taking shape under my pencil. In New Orleans, I let strangers spin me in circles to the sound of a jazz band, my feet moving clumsily but freely. Every moment tasted of something I had forgotten: life for myself. One evening, back in my apartment, my phone buzzed. A message from Maya Mom. "We need to talk." I stared at it, the words pulling at old wounds. Then I typed slowly, deliberately. "Begin with an apology, not an amount." I silenced the phone before she could answer. On my balcony, the stars hung bright above the city. I looked up and whispered to Robert's memory. "I thought love had a price. Now I know true love never sends an invoice." The night air wrapped around me, gentle and clear. I felt lighter than I ever had. No longer an ATM with feelings, but a woman with a future that belonged entirely to her.